All right, in this video, we will be looking at Unit 1 of our ecology class, Systems, Behavior, and Ecology, which is kind of a catch-all for a lot of the introductory matters that we need to cover in this class. So the first of those will be 1.1, Properties of Living Things. So talking about living things, here is a picture of a virus. We don't typically consider viruses living things because they do not meet some of the criteria that we're going to go over in this class. There are other lists that also work for this, but I'm going to give 6 different ways in which something can be considered a living thing. The first of those is called chemical uniqueness. And so basically chemical uniqueness is the idea that all living things demonstrate a unique and complex molecular organization. They are usually arranged with these molecules called macromolecules. So amino acids, fatty acids, carbohydrates, nucleotides. There's nucleotides. There we go. And these make things like we know that proteins, we know of like lipids. So there's an example of lipid phospholipids, carbohydrates, lots of complex carbohydrates, DNA and RNA being nucleic acids. And so one of the things that makes a living thing living is the fact that it has this unique chemical signature that is different than any other living thing. The complexity and the chemical makeup is just going to be different than anything else. Another thing that makes something living, I'm just going to have to keep moving my camera around, I think, is hierarchical organization. All living things demonstrate complex organization, whether it be internal or external. And so internally, you can think of something having, this kind of shows you this picture. You have an organism, and then you have system of organs, and then down to organs and so forth, all the way down to the smallest thing. And then if you want to think of externally, you start with the biosphere, which is the biggest thing, then go to biomes and ecosystems, and it just keeps getting smaller. I think you understand the idea here. So all living things demonstrate this hierarchical organization, whether it is on the inside of them or on the outside of them. All living things also reproduce, and so reproduction is important for living things. Viruses do not reproduce. They do reproduce using another organism's cellular structure, but they're unable to reproduce on their own. And so we typically think of 2 forms of reproduction when we consider this. We consider asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is when an organism clones itself. So here's a picture of this budding, where this hydra builds another version of itself, basically, which is genetically identical to the parent, and creates an independent bud there on its own. So this is an example of asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is when an organism is produced from gametes. And so you have male and female sex cells or gametes. Those cells are produced. They combine to form a zygote, which is a unique, genetically different organism than both of the parents. And so that is the difference between sexual and asexual reproduction. And there's a picture of DNA. I guess it's good to know that DNA is the genetic code of all organisms that we're going to talk about in this class. We're talking about animals. So all those other things really don't matter. And so DNA is the makeup of all animals. The fourth general property of living systems is that all living things have something called metabolism, which is essentially the way that organisms either gather energy for themselves and break it down, or use energy to make things. And so you have both these processes here on this picture. You see you have anabolism, which is like making things, creating things. Catabolism, which is taking things that you have and breaking them down, or taking food that you take in and breaking it down for energy. And so metabolism is just a sum of all of these reactions, both building and breaking down. Another word that we will use when we're talking about this is homeostasis, which is just the maintenance of all the normal conditions in your body. So whether it be body temperature, it's a great example of this. It's cold outside. The nerves feel that. They send the message to the brain The muscles shiver, which warms your body temperature up, which sends it back to the brain, tells you to stop shivering. You probably experienced that. And so that is just an example of homeostasis, or maintaining those norms. Something like a virus doesn't have that. It's not a living thing. It doesn't respond to the outside world. All right, growth and development is another one. All living things grow and go through normal life cycle. And so when we talk about growth, we're just talking about organisms changing in size. But when we're talking about development, we're talking more of like a change in shape and structure and function of certain organs. So you see a baby here. This baby is like 1/3 head. I mean, look how big that toddler's head is. But notice what happens when you get older, your body's shape changes. So this is growth, but it's also development. And that's just one facet of development. An organism becomes sexually mature at a certain point. An organism becomes physically mature at a certain point. You want to take this into other animals like frogs. So there's eggs, and then you have the tadpoles, and the tadpoles grow legs, and then they grow front legs, and they lose their tail. This is a picture of development. All right, so not only is the frog getting bigger, but the frog is also changing. This is known as metamorphosis, which literally just means to change shape. And then lastly, all living things interact with their environment. This bear looks like it's smelling something. Bears have a keen sense of smell, and so it is interacting with its environment. All living things interact with their environment at some level. And so ecology is the study of these interactions. The thing that the bear is responding to, or that you or I or whatever is responding to, is called a stimulus. And so non-living things can't respond to those things. So the study of zoology is the study of animals as a biological science. This is a picture of my dog, and my dog is considerably older than this now. He's actually laying back there. You can almost see a small portion of him over in this corner. You just saw him move, maybe. So he's laying there listening to this. Animals have changed over time through the process of evolution by natural selection, and there are several characteristics of that, or several principles of that we'll talk more about in later units. But basically the idea is that there's variation, and those variations, some of them are successful, and the successful ones continue on. And physical or environmental pressures can lead to a bit more adaptation, which leads to change over time. And then lastly is this concept of phylogeny. We'll have a whole unit on phylogeny, unit 2. And this is just the study of an organism's evolutionary past. A lot of the animals that we'll talk about in here have complex evolutionary histories, and we'll talk about how they interact with one another, and where something like deer come from, and what was their next of kin, and why that's important. So as we get deeper into this class, we will kind of flesh this idea out.